Welcome back to the best horror sequels only here on Staunch TV. Now, I gotta say, guys, I've been wanting to touch on this film for a while, and if you watch the live streams, you would have seen me talk about it. And I gotta say, upon rewatching, I completely forgot how amazing this movie is.
Something strange.
I didn't think much about it until I saw him drag the body out of the coffin.
Something ancient.
Bury your own.
Something evil.
The original Pet Sematary is widely considered a classic, and one of the best Stephen King adaptations, and of course, scared the damn out of us all. But the much forgotten, mean-spirited rock and roll sequel is just a bit sweeter in my opinion. Joining me on our journey to the place where the dead speak, my good friends Justin and Pete from their new channel, The Dead Couch.
Don't you think that's kind of a pussy name?
Oh, and here in the studio, we have Ticket joining us. Be sure to subscribe, guys, and watch the rest of this series. And you might as well let me know what you think are some of the best horror sequels. I feel like not many movies, especially in the horror genre, have really had a bar set quite as high as the Pet Sematary franchise. I mean, I can think of a few films that set quite the precedent, but honestly, the jury's out on if their follow-ups were better or worse, or most times just like, eh. I mean, damn, the original Pet Sematary has some of the most shocking and memorable moments in horror history. Really horrifying stuff like Pascal, Killer 18-wheelers, Ramones tunes, Zelda, Ellie Creed's child acting. Hell, the film even features the skeleton hand featured in the It miniseries. Which reminds me, you can now check out my review on the documentary Pennywise, the story of It. But it's not like Pet Sematary 2 is lacking in any of those elements, even though it really didn't strike a chord with me upon release. Granted, I was like 7 when it came out, but I had already seen the original and was still dealing with those nightmares when I saw part 2, so maybe that's why it really didn't make an impression. I don't know. I was excited to see Furlong, though, as Terminator 2 was still fresh in my mind. But as a kid, his somber performance in Pet Sematary 2 was just kind of a letdown. Maybe it's like the movie star mom kind of, the stuff that was shot on the film sets that's at the beginning of this film. Maybe it's that stuff that kind of turned me off to this movie as a kid. I don't know. And now that I think about it, Anthony Edwards doesn't really translate to kids. And needless to say, as a kid, I didn't really like this movie, except for one standout character, a character that I later learned is just extremely underappreciated and underrated in the horror community. My man Gus. This movie fucking rules. I had the best time rewatching it. Director Mary Lambert originally wanted to do a more direct sequel, focusing on the sole survivor of the original, the Creed's daughter, Ellie, which honestly sounds like it would be a great novel for King to take on. But apparently studio heads didn't think people would focus on a movie based on a young girl, and instead wanted, a known young male in the lead. Crazy how things have changed. And this would be little Eddie Furlong's follow-up to Terminator 2. I remember it vividly, honestly. I remember John Connor was the coolest kid ever, and I saw this film directly because of Furlong's involvement. But I mean, I still watch movies because Furlong's in them to this day, so whatever. And I think the route they went with the film really does work. With Pet Sematary 2, we get a plot that could easily have been turned into multiple movies, as it has a real anthology episode kind of feel, And the film is kind of in and out story-wise, leaving the town Ludlow and the cursed land to really be the lead character in the series. As our main characters kind of just come into town and things get messed up and then they leave. Next family, please. We also get some awesome world building here and some creative decisions that lend a real Stephen King quality to the production. Something that, they didn't have to do, which is really cool that they did. For instance, we get some shithead bullies, typical Stephen King right there, and they actually reveal a story about Ellie Creed surviving and later murdering her grandparents, and how Ellie had no motive, but rather would just repeat the words, Pet Sematary. There's a cool part, too, when Anthony Edwards realizes he's dealing with a zombie dog at his vet clinic, and it leads to him confronting a former vet who encountered the same issues years prior with the zombie cat church, who then is revealed to know about all the going-ons as far as the burial ground and whatnot there in the town. In fact, the whole previous film is kind of like a ghost story or a local legend. And needless to say, I mean, the ghost of the original really is felt throughout. There could have potentially been a lot of different instances of horror in between films. It was just a few years from what I remember. But here, in Pet Sematary 2, basically it's not till little Eddie Furlong shows up do these idiot kids decide to start utilizing the Pet Sematary. That's not right, bitch. Excuse me? It's not the Pet Cemetery. It's the burial ground beyond that, bitch. Alright, Ticket. Yeah, you're right. Everybody knows that, bitch. She is right. I really wish they would have kept making these in this timeline, although, I did appreciate the remake, as I think they could have gone to some cool places with this series. I mean, as gruesome as the sequel is, I can only imagine. That's another place this sequel really excels. The original really had some memorable practical effects, especially when it came to the gore. And here, we're evenly matched, as we get some nasty wounds from Gus and company, done so effectively. I mean, you can almost smell it. And while Church was dang spooky, I think Zoe ups the ante here. We kind of see an expansion of sorts of the actual burial ground as well. I think that alone could have made this a very interesting series to return to. As we see in Pet Sematary 2, a different take on the undead. In the original, you bury your dead, and then they return as assholes, like right away. And here in the sequel, well, the newly risen dead seem to have a loyalty to those responsible. Like we see Zowie come back and defend his owner Drew, to the point where he kills Gus. Wouldn't that mean the dog Zowie had to bury Gus? Whatever. When Gus does come back, though, he defends both his stepson Drew and little Eddie Furlong. However, he does have a questionable night with his wife, but, he's loyal to the kids for a while. As we see over a few days, the loyalties, they dissipate, and then they're out for blood. But I always thought the reason was the location that they were buried. Maybe the entire burial ground doesn't have the same specs, Like, maybe different parts have different results, which could have made for a few more sequels if they would have gone that route. Not to mention explaining some of the stuff in the process, That's something I always thought was regrettable, even though we do get a pretty cool set for the burial ground in this film. And Gus, man. Gus, when he shows up, the film turns into a black comedy. Seriously, the film is kind of going along and some heavy-duty stuff is happening and the tone's real low and a downer. And then we get an abrupt cut to this scene. And now, our special guest, the Dead Couch. Go subscribe, bitch.
Yo, what's going on, everybody? Huge shout out to Mr. Alex Staunch at the one and only Staunch TV for having me and my good buddy Pete here to talk about one of my all-time favorite movies. You can find me on one of my two channels, Movie Watch Daily, where I talk about new and modern movie news, and then you can catch me on the Dead Couch, where I talk about all the retro stuff that happened before the year 2000, including this amazing movie that we're going to be talking about here today, Pet Sematary 2. Now, I don't know if it's just because I'm a 90s kid or if I was infatuated with Terminator 2 and the badass Edward Furlong, but I always go back to revisit Pet Sematary 2 far more often than I revisit the first one. That's not to say that I don't still love Pet Sematary 1, but there's something so special and so unbelievably rewatchable about Pet Sematary 2 that I've just seen it so many times. It's one of my all-time favorite horror movies. Now, aside from the incredible practical effects and just the overall 90s cheesy goodness, and of course the incomparable acting talents of our buddy Edward Furlong, I think what stands out the most for me and what makes Pet Sematary 2 so rewatchable, at least in my opinion, is this incredible and absolutely unhinged performance from Clancy Brown as Sheriff Gus. He has this amazing character arc where he goes from this absolute douchebag, unlikable sheriff character to being still kind of a douchebag, but so much more likable by the end. After he's brought back to life, he seems to relish with this like super dark sense of humor. Even his stepson and Edward Furlong's character start to look at each other like Gus is kind of the man now. He even takes a kind of a protective edge over them. And there's just so many iconic scenes of him killing people in creative ways and just becoming unhinged. There's the badass dirt bike killing. What are you doing, man? I'm just fucking with you. And he ends up revving his motorcycle on that dude's face and just demolishing his head, which is just amazing. The dinner scene in Pet Sematary 2, in my opinion, is one of the single most iconic scenes in horror movie history. I really mean that. I truly think it is one of the most memorable scenes of all time. And the image of him laughing with all of the mashed potatoes flying everywhere and coming out of his neck, that image is just burned in my brain for the rest of my life, and I will never forget it. Clancy Brown in general just has an incredibly imposing presence no matter what film he's in. But after Shawshank Redemption, this is easily my favorite role that Clancy Brown has ever done. He has so many iconic lines in this movie, whether it's the no brain, no pain line, or I'm just fucking with ya. Every line that he utters, especially after he's brought back to life, is incredibly iconic. Nothing tops Gus in Pet Sematary 2 when it comes to 90s horror for me. And we do get a good performance from Edward Furlong. He's actually very good in this movie. In the era of Edward Furlong, before he kind of went off the rails.
Man, they gotta get naked and roll around with, like, me.
And he was making these just amazing 90s horror movies like Brain Scan and Pet Sematary 2. It's very easy to look at a movie like Pet Sematary 2 and call it out for all of its shortcomings. Yes, it's cheesy. Yes, it's got a little bit of corny 90s goodness to it. But at the end of the day, especially towards the end of the movie, it is genuinely terrifying, especially towards that ending scene where his mom and everybody gathers in the attic and everybody's there. It's very unsettling and it's very scary. And it also has some emotional beats that I found to kind of hit me in the feels a little bit. It's just overall a very good movie, and I think anybody who has not seen it should definitely check it out because I think there's more than meets the eye to Pet Sematary 2. I've always thought that. Like I said, I will always revisit it just a little bit more than Pet Sematary 1. I think it has just a lot more rewatchability value, but that's my 2 cents about Pet Sematary 2. Mr. Staunch, thank you so much again for having me on your channel. I really, really appreciate it. This is one of my favorite movies. I look forward to collabing with you again. Again, you guys can check me out on Movie Watch Daily and The Dead Couch. Thank you guys so much. Stay weird. Remember to always be yourself, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.
Yeah, man, Gus really makes this movie. I would say he is our Zelda of the film, and he's definitely the most memorable character. Clancy Brown, of course, one of my favorite character actors as well. I mean, Bad Boys, Shawshank, Starship Troopers, and honestly, his dinner table horror movie mashed potato scene is right up there with other classic dinner table horror movie mashed potato scenes. Right there with Mel Gibson's horrifying potato conundrum from Signs. Ugh! Ugh, sorry about that, guys. But, you know, all jokes aside, as much as I love the oddity of this film and its overall tone and contributions to horror, I'd say without Clancy Brown, this movie would not have been as awesome. Something largely credited to Brown himself, as he had this to say about the film. It was really interesting finally when Pet Sematary 2 came along and the original director Mary Lambert was doing it. I asked her, I said, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this kooky movie? This kooky sequel to this work you already made? Like it was great, and you're such an auteur. You know what she said to me? She said, this is the only thing I'm getting offered to do. I said, well then, let's knock it out of the park. And that kind of sucks, you know. Director Mary Lambert received a lot of praise for Pet Sematary, but it didn't really do much for her, although she would eventually direct one of my favorite Corey Haim projects. She would spend the next few years strictly doing music video work, aside from some Tales from the Crypt, and didn't make another feature until the sequel. She would go on to do some notable TV shows and movies, though, and even became known as, kind of a staple in the horror genre for female directors, and would dabble in that genre throughout the rest of her career. Most recently with mixed results.
Megapython versus Gatoroid.
Should I cover this one? Let me know below. I gotta say though, her work with music videos really comes full circle. As I don't know, the film's just so grungy and has a very prevalent MTV era attitude, and of course one heck of a soundtrack that apparently was never released. A soundtrack featuring artists like Drama Rama, L7, the Jesus and Mary Chain, and features another Ramones song in the film's ending credits. But the best tracks of the film ironically come from one of the film's composers, the legendary Mark Governor. Check out my interview with Mark in my documentary, Forever, The Untold Story of Rock and Roll High School Forever, where I interview Mark and the rest of the cast and crew. Available now for free. But here with Pet Sematary 2, he wrote and produced original songs done by Tracy Lords and singer Jan King, who also would do backup for Tracy Lords. The latter being one of my personal favorites, the track Fading Away. As for Tracy Lords, well, her song Love Never Dies, well, I find it strange how the opening lines are very similar to a Smashing Pumpkins song that came out nearly 3 years later. No doubt, though, director Mary Lambert and Governor knew each other from the music industry, in the film industries, whatever, and involving my man Mark Governor was a great choice on Mary's part. Honestly, I feel like Mary Lambert coming back to this series and kind of possibly having a grudge against, the studios or Hollywood in general only helped the process, as the film really takes risks and does some very cool stuff as far as cinematography and gross out horror especially, and the overall tone, making it a great flick to return to every Halloween. And even the underlying story is unparalleled. I mean, little Eddie Furlong is basically traumatized to no end here. There will be no happy ending in Pet Sematary 2, let me tell you. And as for little Eddie Furlong, well, he would go on to have one hell of a career, especially in the 90s. And I feel like his contributions to horror early on in his career, are largely forgotten for whatever reasons. Or at the very least, again, underappreciated. Long live Furlong. And for all these reasons, I say Pet Sematary 2 is one of the best horror sequels ever made. Well, I just wanna walk right out of this world. Please check out the rest of my best horror sequels series and let me know below what I should cover next. Thanks for joining us, bitch. Be sure to subscribe to The Dead Couch and Movie Watch Dating now. Let me know if I should join in more videos, bitch. Maybe we can talk about some decent movies on this channel for once. I'll be seeing you soon, bitch.